What would you do if you found out that your church was going to be required to compromise its standards and allow a man, a biological man, to go and use the women's restroom during church hours? Well, that's the issue that's facing one of our states right now on the East Coast. And we're going to talk about that in the second half of this show. But the first half of the show, I want to talk about something very important that's really impacting a lot of churches right now. And that's the concept of churches and their rights to be able to meet safely having a parking lot service. We have a case matter like this that we've been involved in up in the state of Washington. We have with us on the line right now to talk about this case, Pastor Dean Curry. Pastor Dean, thank you for joining us.
Brad, thank you for having me.
Well, now, Pastor Dean, you're with a church called Our Church, correct?
That's right, yeah.
Okay.
We're just about a year old, and so we're just getting started. We're right outside of Tacoma, Washington.
Okay, right outside of Tacoma, Washington, which is in the Seattle area. And
That's right.
Your church, you're a church that I understand has a great track record of abiding by the law, being very obedient. And yet, recently, your church decided that you wanted to have a parking lot service, and yet the state of Washington said no. What'd you do?
That's right, yeah. We had been doing drive-in experiences where people come in, park in the parking lot, and listen through their radio. But we were contacted Thursday afternoon by a representative from the governor's office, and they told us it was no longer allowed. So we contacted all of you, and your staff and your lawyers were just so helpful to help us craft a response to that, because we feel like what people are doing in their cars with their windows rolled up is no threat to anybody.
Right, so the windows were rolled up. You didn't have your restrooms open for people to use, right?
Right. Buildings closed, restrooms closed. We asked people to not get out of their cars, keep their windows rolled up at least 80% of the way, and they tune in through their radio. So we take over a little radio station there through a simple transmitter that we bought, and so there's no interaction, there's no touching, there's no anything to risk anything.
Okay, so you're doing everything fine. That's how it works. And the state of Washington has this as their policy, though. They say you can't have these drive-in church services or parking lot services, even though they allow, as I understand, people to attend actually food drive-ins to sit there and eat.
Oh, yeah.
You saw this as an injustice, and you contacted
we
Pacific
did.
Justice Institute, correct?
That's right. Yeah, we contacted all of you, and the lawyer there, Jorge Ramos, was able to help us quite a bit. In the state of Washington, marijuana distributorships are legal, and you can go through and you can walk in and get your weed. You can you can go to Taco Bell drive-through, but you can't attend our church in our parking lot. So we felt like that was unusual discrimination against people of faith.
Yeah, I agree. And we sent that demand letter to the state of Washington, the governor's office. To make a long story short, we're going to talk some of those details with Jorge Ramos. He's the PJI attorney that helped you. He's going to be on the line soon. But the basic bottom line is your church stood up to the state, tried to be very reasonable, tried to seek out a compromise. They wouldn't respond. So you went ahead and had your drive-in service. What happened?
We did. Nothing happened. And, we're trying to assume the best about our governor, that maybe this is ignorance on their part of how great the rights of churches are. But someday we may not have good people in office. So we feel like we need to exercise our religious freedoms and worship. And so we had a wonderful day. We did 4 drive-in experiences over the weekend. There was no no disruption of any kind, and we were delighted to have a great weekend. And so we try to have a humble posture. We don't want to fight with anybody. We just want to be able to talk about Jesus on our own property, in our own cars, without anyone just disrupting the whole process.
Yeah, and you did in a very safe way. Well, Pastor,
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. We at Pacific Justice Institute stand ready to defend any church anywhere in the United States that has a drive-in service and is being challenged. We actually have on our website, we have guidelines for churches to have safe church services in their parking lot, as well as when they are able to have church services inside their church pursuant to the three phases laid out by President Trump. That will also help protect churches as well, both in terms of health as well as in terms of the law. Pastor, God bless you. Keep up the great work. And if we at Pacific Justice can ever serve you or anyone else, just give us a call.
Thank you, Brad.
God bless. Now we have with us on the line a PJI attorney, Jorge Ramos. Jorge, thank you for joining us.
Great to be with you.
Jorge, tell us what happened. The pastor has talked about the fact his church wanted to meet, and they contacted someone in the governor's office to say, hey, look, we want to work out a compromise. What did Pacific Justice do to help this church be able to have their drive-in service without being fined and criminally prosecuted?
Yes, I believe Pastor Dean was on the radio or on the phone call that you had, the conference call for all the pastors across the country. And so he got in contact with me, letting us know that he wanted to host a drive-in service. So we didn't have a pastor here who was trying to defy the public gathering, but was trying to find a compromise. So he had me reach out to the government, the Governor Inslee's contact with his office. And so we began a email back and forth, at which point I noticed that he was not going to allow it to go forward. So that's where we started to draft a letter. And at this time, the decision in Kentucky came down. So this happened on a Saturday, and, our job is 24/7, 7 days a week. So I dropped what I was doing and drafted a letter incorporating their decision and also Supreme Court law that they cited and sent it over. Now, I believe this was a week before last. So Pastor Dean did not go forward that Sunday because we got a stern rebuke. But after prayer and other considerations, he reached out to us and decided to have us write a more straightforward letter saying that he would be having the service. So I drafted it again, informing the governor's office that we disagree with their initial response of denying his request. And so we got good news this morning that the service went without a hitch yesterday.
Excellent, excellent. So they had their service, but the governor was put on notice that they were going to have this service, and no one from the governor's office showed up, no police showed up, no SWAT team showed up. They had their service, people came, they left. That was it, right?
That's it, yep.
Yeah. Now, I know in Nevada, our attorney in our Nevada office, Emily Mimna, she did a great job working out a compromise with the state of Nevada to allow these kind of drive-in church parking lot services with no problem. But the state of Washington was not willing to work out any kind of compromise at all. They just says, no, this is our position. But when it push come to shove, they didn't decide to carry it out. They allowed the church to meet. They were put on notice. I think that's a good, very good sign. Jorge, in view of the Kentucky decision, I think that played probably a definite role in their decision not to act on it. It's my perception, I want to get your idea and your thoughts on this, that churches across the country have a pretty good leg to stand on now for having drive-in services where they keep the windows rolled up. They abide by the basic safety criteria that we recommend on our website for churches. Is that your position as well? I mean, and these churches, they should feel pretty comfortable in doing so, also knowing that Pacific Justice Institute will represent them without charge anywhere in the United States. Is that your perception as well?
Yeah, in the letter to the governor, we cited the Kentucky matter, but also don't forget about Mississippi, where the DOJ entered a statement in support, and I believe that caused Mississippi to quickly drop the $500 fine that they issued every congregant. So I think we're seeing with, especially now with governors not enforcing any sort of restraints on all these public protests, I think it's going to be hard to justify, arresting or citing people who are in their cars at a worship service. I think it's starting to become pretty obvious that it's unreasonable.
Right. In fact, I believe it was the Air Force Academy recently had a graduation ceremony. Now, they all stood on a big field, like a football field, 6 or 7 feet or 8 feet apart. And Vice President Mike Pence was there. He was the keynote speaker. So they had a gathering, outside gathering, all sitting so many feet apart. So I think we're seeing things, loosen up in a very positive way. And as far as outside gatherings in this capacity, particularly drive-in church services, churches should be very confident. I'm going to say right now to the audience, so if you're listening to this and you're saying, well, my church, wants to meet. We don't know what to do, or we've decided we're going to meet. Contact us at Pacific Justice Institute. There's a couple ways. One is we have oftentimes conference calls. Check and see if we're going to have a Thursday conference call at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Okay, so that'd be 5 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And check to see if we're going to have that, because on this, we're giving updates on this call on what's happening regarding churches and the changing in the law and the rights of churches. People in the body of Christ, they want to meet. They don't want to forsake the gathering together, as Scripture says. We're sensitive to that, and we're giving them updates regularly. Second, go to our website, which is pacificjustice.org, pacificjustice.org, or pji.org, pji.org. And there you get a clear list of all the criteria your church needs to be utilizing pursuant to the state that you're in and compliant with the state that you're in, but utilizing to give your state the strongest, healthiest position, as well as the strongest legal position should you decide to have a church service inside your church or outside your church. Once again, that's pacificjustice.org, pacificjustice.org. Thank you, Jorge, and thanks for your wonderful assistance for that church in Washington.
My pleasure.
Given the choice of obeying God or the government, I believe Christians will obey God, even if there is hell to pay.
Since the earliest days of our nation, America has stood for religious freedom. And after our independence was won, the crafters of America's Constitution enshrined religious liberty as the first of our American freedoms.
These are our blood-bought freedoms that we get to own and operate and defend in this nation as Americans. We're not going to surrender this. We are going to fight for what's right.
So I think it's imperative for our testimony,
right,
to show we really do love, we really do care, we see what's going to happen.
My body, my choice.
Bloody violence breaking out after Antifa protesters storm a Patriot prayer rally.
Do you think religious institutions like colleges, churches, charities, should they lose their tax-exempt status if they oppose same-sex marriage?
Yes.
Parents across the state are keeping their kids home from school today. They say the new sex ed program is too inappropriate, adding the curriculum sexualizes children as young as kindergarten age.
I realize my child and every child is not safe in these public schools.
A lot of graphic information that was confusing.
Tells little boys it's perfectly normal to masturbate.
Choose their gender.
That's our children. And we have parent groups fighting this.
We were raided.
Approximately 16 California Highway Patrol officers armed with 2 canine units.
The real bottom line motivation for this, we've discovered, is the fact that the Department of Social Services and those who are behind this raid were actually wanting to shut this school down because they knew it was teaching from a Christian biblical worldview.
I was stripped of chaplaincy, of being a volunteer, of being able to teach the Bible study.
So what had Artis done that was so egregious? She had had a conversation with another resident of the home about the afterlife.
I was at school one day and they were talking about sex education and how it was okay to have sex with the same marriage. And I then stood up and I said, no, that is not okay. And then I got kicked out of class.
And we were able to draft a legal letter, memo, and sent it off to the principal.
So now if I talk about God at school, I don't get in trouble.
The Supreme Court has ruled the Peace Cross can stay right where it is on public land.
The court said that, if they were to remove street signs and crosses like this, war memorials, just because of the fact that some see it in a religious context, that would actually violate the Establishment Clause by being state hostility to religion.
As soon as we started the church, the neighbors looked at you a little funny, and all of a sudden we find ourselves embroiled in a lawsuit.
An atheist threatened to sue our HOA because we use the Sunday morning facility.
In the settlement, we got it squared away that we could meet on Sunday mornings, that we would not be discriminated against.
The administration escorted me off campus with 2 police officers.
And the arbitrator overruled the school and said, nope, this is not worthy of termination.
And I was granted my job back. So I'm very grateful to PJI. They really stand for justice.
Drag Queen Story Hour drew hundreds of people to the South Hill Library. The man who was arrested is a local pastor who wanted to preach at Saturday's protest.
So you're going to arrest me for standing on a public parking lot?
Now, he didn't threaten anyone, had no weapons, wasn't screaming in people's faces.
We just wanted to be a voice, for God, and just to be a light and a salt for those children.
The Pacific Justice Institute is absolutely doing great work.
This organization is a fighting organization. You help it, you're the same as the fighter.
I am so grateful. The Pacific Justice Institute, please support them. They are worth every penny.
It didn't cost us anything.
We would have drowned in legal fees. We would have been no more instantly.
I'm super grateful for PJI. They were a godsend.
Pacific Justice Institute as an organization is wholly committed, fully committed to doing the right thing, to being something good.
And folks, if you'd like to support the work of the Pacific Justice Institute, or you'd like to receive our Legal Insider newsletter, it's once a week, it's very informative, just go to our website. It's pacificjustice.org, pacificjustice.org, or pji.org, P for Pacific, J for Justice, I for Institute.org. We greatly appreciate those of you who choose to become partners in the work that we're doing to defend religious freedom, parental rights, and the sanctity of life all across the United States of America, all without charge, and through our huge network of hundreds of affiliate attorneys. Now, we have with us on the line to talk about another very important challenge to churches and religious freedom, attorney from the state of Oregon, Ray Hackey. Ray, thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here, Brad.
Ray, there's something going on in Virginia recently, a law passed that was enacted which is very concerning for churches. Tell us about this new law in Virginia.
Well, Virginia's governor, Ralph Northam, recently signed what is called a public accommodation law. The law requires all places open to the public to let transgender persons use the bathroom or changing facility of their choice. The law contains an exception for organizations, including religious associations, that are not, in fact, open to the public. Churches, however, typically are open to the public. They're not like private clubs. They want people, regardless of race, gender, sexuality, etc., to come through their doors and hear the gospel. And that's what makes the law so problematic.
Yeah, so there's no exception for churches at all here. Is that right?
Well, it says religious organizations, but I think if they have to not be open to the public. Is
yeah. So So, and yeah, like you say, churches are open to the public, synagogues are open to the public. So I can see this as a real problem. Now, I understand in Oregon, there's something happening there that's somewhat related to this same issue that's coming out, that's in this new law in Virginia. What's going on in Oregon?
Well, Oregon has a public accommodation statute too. The statute does not list any exceptions for churches and other
At
religious
all.
organizations.
At all, including,
all.
so, okay, not even religious. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, and for that reason, churches and other religious organizations have reached out to me asking whether they can require transgender people to use the bathroom associated with their biological gender rather than their so-called gender identity.
Okay. So as I'm looking at this, Ray, it seems that, public accommodation, we've got public accommodation laws, they typically are on their face, religiously neutral. Do they still implicate religious liberty, though, as we're seeing potentially here in Oregon?
Absolutely. The Bible says God created everyone male and female. Our biology determines what gender we are. To let transgender people use whichever bathroom they want would essentially be to say that God got the plumbing wrong. God doesn't make mistakes. Even though churches and other religious organizations have compassion for transgender people, they don't want to deny biblical truth.
Yes, and I've dealt with churches before that have been in this situation, and their attitude has generally been, what do? We don't want this transgender person to feel that they're not wanted and feel rejected. And I've talked to a transgender person about this, is a wonderful person, and that person told me how they were booted out of churches in the past, 20 years ago. I don't think churches today even have that mindset. Well, they want to force someone to change how they dress in order to go to church, assuming it's decent. But at the same time, they want to maintain the privacy and protection of the people in their church. A biological man should not be able to go into a women's restroom because they have this mental condition, gender identity dysphoria. And I think it's important to note, many people aren't aware of this, that the overwhelming majority of biological men who have gender identity dysphoria, they're still sexually turned on and attracted by women. So this is even more problematic when people understand that. At the same time, the church wants to be sensitive. They want to be loving. They want to be graceful and compassionate. So what I've recommended churches to do, Ray, in the past, is say, okay, have them use a third bathroom, maybe one that's used just for executive staff. Or, in the alternative, say, okay, have a red cone, like you're cleaning the bathroom, kind of a cone. So when that person wants to use the bathroom, make sure it's empty, have them go in, put in the red cone, they use it, they come out, and then they can remove the red cone, or they can say closed for cleaning on it, or something like that. So they can go out of their way to reasonably accommodate people in a way that is respectful, compassionate, but also respectful and compassionate for others in the church. Now, one organization in particular had reason to be concerned. Tell us about this circumstance.
Well, this organization runs a women's shelter. They're afraid of what might happen if a man claiming to be a woman shows up at the shelter's door and demands that he be allowed to stay there, and what will happen if that organization refuses.
Right. Well, I can see that. It's you have women who've already been in trauma, crises, oftentimes in these women's shelters. The last thing they want is to potentially be visually violated by a biological male who is more likely than not sexually turned on by looking at them. Not that that's the intent of the transgender person by going in there. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that's a very reasonable concern that they should be expected to have. So what are we doing, and what role are we taking, and what exactly happened elsewhere? Because this actually has happened elsewhere, hasn't it?
Actually, yeah, it happened up in Alaska about 2 years ago. A man who claimed to be female filed a discrimination complaint against a Christian-run, women-only homeless shelter. The man showed up at the shelter in a nightgown. He was drunk and needed medical help. And the people who run the shelter sent the man to the local hospital and even paid his cab fare. So it's not like they did nothing to help him or treated him cruelly because he's transgender. Still, because they wouldn't let him stay the night, the shelter had to go to federal court to obtain an injunction just to keep its local Equal Rights Commission from pursuing the complaint.
So in view of this, so what advice did you give to the women's shelter in Oregon to deal with this situation? It's a very, very fluid matter as far as the law is concerned. What counsel on behalf of the Pacific Justice Institute, Ray, did you provide for this women's shelter?
Well, there's a case involving Oregon's public accommodations law, which says that a place of public accommodation has to be a business or commercial enterprise. Now, churches have business-like or sometimes even commercial attributes, but they're not businesses. Also, the Oregon Constitution declares that no law shall control the free exercise and enjoyment of religious opinions or interfere with the rights of conscience. And that would include the public accommodation law. So the state cannot prevent religious organizations from operating in accordance with their faith. PJI is standing by, ready to defend them if a state or local government even tries.
You know, Ray, that's one thing I really like about our attorneys for the Pacific Justice Institute, attorneys like you. We don't just look at the Constitution. We could just look at the United States Constitution, say this violates the United States Constitution, the free exercise rights of churches, the privacy rights of other individuals, etc. But instead, we look at the law. We look at the state law. We look at the federal law. We look at the local laws to really give our clients that we're giving advice to and counsel to, and representation oftentimes, the best chance of prevailing. And oftentimes that is by looking at the state law. So where does this stand right now? Where is this a women's clinic in the process of dealing with this?
Right now, they've just, they've amended their bylaws to make clear, that what their statement of faith is and, what their position is on gender and sexuality. And so basically, and they're going to operate in accordance with that. And because a women's shelter isn't a business or a commercial enterprise, thankfully nothing has happened yet. They haven't been sued yet, but basically they want to be prepared in the event that it does. And so, so I've advised them, and, hopefully if, they find themselves, facing this situation, if heaven forbid, somebody try to bring suit against them, we're here, we're standing at the ready. We'll happily take on that fight.
Excellent. Ray, thank you so much for the work that you're doing on behalf of the Pacific Justice Institute for these women in this women's clinic. We want to protect and defend ministries, and I appreciate the work that you're doing. God bless, and keep up the great work. Now, folks, one thing that you should learn from this is that if you have a parachurch ministry, like a women's home or something like this, take a look at your bylaws. We at Pacific Justice Institute have model bylaws on our website made available to help churches and parachurch ministries and organizations, Christian schools, to help protect them in case they are in this kind of a situation. This is going to become more and more common, folks, particularly as states try to use public accommodation to push their social agenda on ministries and churches and parachurch ministries. So go to our website, pacificjustice.org, pacificjustice.org, to use these resources. Also, we have online on our website a list of criteria that your church should be utilizing should your church decide to either have a drive-in service, as we talked about in the first segment, or even an inside regular church service. It's not going to actually be regular because there's a lot of things that we're going to recommend you to do. And of course, we want you to comply with the laws in your state. But irrespective of whether you're in compliance with the laws of your state or not, this is very, very valuable, both from a health standpoint as well as from a legal standpoint. It's very detailed. Our attorneys put a lot of thought into it. And we also looked at the case law. Once again, case law is not constant in this area, by the way. We're going through something we've never been through as a nation. So we want to make sure our freedom and our rights are protected. To do so and to give your church the greatest protection, go to our website, look at that list, give it to your pastor, give it to your elders in your church, but also stay up to date. Stay up to date by going to our website and getting our Legal Insider newsletter, but also participating in the latest upcoming conference call, which is on Thursdays at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Folks, now's not the time to quiver. Now's the time to get involved and know your rights. So folks, there you have it. It's our God-given rights we're talking about. Now, let's choose to keep them. I'm Brad Dacus, president of the Pacific Justice Institute. Have a great weekend.